Fritz and Louise are iconic LA radio hosts. They're going to talk about their 3 decades together right here on Guys TV. It all starts right here, right now. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio in Southern California and Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Guys Radio. Today we're going to talk about a lot of different topics. We're going to talk about podcasting, comedy, weather, radio, and people working together. So I've got 2 terrific guests here. Fritz Coleman had been the weekly weathercaster at NBC4 in LA for 39 years. He's been a working stand-up comic for even longer. He's having made 8 appearances on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno and Johnny Carson. He's opened for many showbiz icons. He also has had his own comedy specials on NBC LA, and he's received 5 local Emmy Awards and written and performed 4 one-person shows. Currently, he's the co-host of Media Path podcast with Louise Palanker. She is the co-founder of Premiere Radio.Networks, which is now a division of iHeartMedia. Her documentary on the Couchsills appeared on Showtime for 2 years and is now available on Amazon Prime. She writes a weekly advice column for newshawk.com, and I believe it's for teens, and founded the advice app for teens. Okay, Ask Wheezy. Wheezy has been podcasting since 2005 and hosted Things I Found Online, a podcast, before setting out to co-host Media Path with Fritz. They're both natives of Buffalo, New York, and they both live in the LA area. Welcome to Guys Radio, Fritz and Wheezy. How are you guys?
Doing great, Robert. Thanks for inviting us on.
Terrific.
Thank you very much for those lovely intros.
So let's start with Fritz. I'll get a little background on both of you and then how you guys met. But having listened to your show, Fritz, and Wheezy, you have great chemistry together. You both started in Buffalo. Let's start there then. How did you get together and how did you end up in Southern California, for those who aren't familiar with your work?
Well, Wheezy is from Buffalo. I worked there. That was one of the towns that I passed through in my brief radio career. I worked there for 4 years at WKBW Radio. And then I came out to California in 1980 to pursue a career in stand-up and started my job in the weather in 1982 and all that. But Wheezy and I met out here because my first one-person show, which is what I label as a single topic monologue. It's kind of like stand-up, but it's about one topic. Wheezy came to my show and she and I entered into this discussion we'd never met before about the show afterward. She had some great notes about it and some great ideas on how to turn this into a television show. So we became friends, and then she ended up producing on that and then producing my second one-person show, and we've been friends for over 30 years. We have similar mindsets on pop culture, books and movies and politics, and we just thought Media Path would be a continuation of this conversation we've been having for 30 years. We just let other people in on it, and we're having a great time.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we talk about shows that are a little more recent than when we met.
That's true.
Okay. Fritz, you were a comedian and a legendary, as you mentioned, a legendary weathercaster for like 39 years. Did you find a way to kind of combine your 2 skill sets together to help your comedy and also help you being a great weatherman?
Well, that's exactly right. I got my job doing the weather from being a comic, because you live in Southern California. You and I know that the weather between April and October is morning clouds and fog, hazy afternoon sun. What was the question? So they hired me to come and be a vacation relief guy. My old boss was in the audience one night at the Comedy Store when I was performing there, and I told an anecdote on stage about having worked for Armed Forces Radio and Television in the Navy, being forced to do weather but not knowing anything about it. He thought that was very amusing. So after the show, he said, I know this is a weird question. Do you have any desire to come and do some vacation relief and some utility work for me as a part-time weathercaster? And I was making $45 a night at the Comedy Store. And I thought, oh, I almost passed out. I was so happy. I said, of course I would. So I said, you do know that, as I mentioned on stage, I don't know anything about weather. He said, fantastic. There's no weather here. This will work out great. So I auditioned and got the job, and I was there for 39 years So to answer your question in a really long-winded way, all my stage time as a comic helped me in my ability to react to live television, working my way out of ugly circumstances. As a matter of fact, I thrived on that. If we had a technical problem, I loved, riffing off of that or ad-libbing off of that. So absolutely. What my weather job helped me do was to get visibility, and it helped me get comedy bookings around Los Angeles. So I gained from both sides of the equation there.
How do you, I guess for a lot of folks who watch the weather and they know you use a green screen, but they try to figure out how actually does that work?
Well, first of all, you have to learn to gesture broadly. Never be specific in where you point, then you can't get in trouble. If you just say over in the Columbus area and just go like that, people don't care. But the green screen is technology that's been around for about 25 years, where the camera that's aiming at you has a computer chip in it that recognizes that particular color of day glow green, and it replaces every place it sees with green on it with your weather map. So you're not really standing in front of a weather map, you're standing in front of a green screen. In order for me to see where I'm looking, I have to, what they call cheat, which is turn 3/4 to the green screen, but really look out of the corner of my eye and look at a monitor to see the combination of the weather map and my performance. So it takes a minute to get used to, but you could, after a while, you could train a chimpanzee to do it. It's not that hard.
Amazing. Now, for your comedy, how do you, and you were doing a one-man show on one topic. How do you choose your topics, and what inspired you? And what was the topic when you met Louise?
Well, the first one I did was called It's Me, Dad, which was me talking to my children and recording what I was saying to them on videotape. They were like 7 and 5 or 8 and 6 at the time. And I was going to put this, here's the whole history of it. I went to my father's funeral, and what I was depressed and astonished by was listening to the testimonial of all of his friends and family members telling me stories about my father that I'd never heard before. And it kind of broke my heart that there was so much about this man that I didn't know, that he didn't reveal to me before he passed away. And I promised myself that that was never going to happen in my children's lives. I was never going to have them question what my life was about. So this is before I turned it into a performance piece. I said, I'm going to make a note of all the elements in my life. I'm going to sit with a video camera in my den, and I'm going to record my life to my kids, all the mistakes I've made, struggles with alcoholism, with myself and my father, and all the parenting stuff, divorce and all that stuff. And then I'm going to put it in a videotape, and then I'm going to put the tape in a safe deposit box and insist that they not watch it until they're over 18 years old. In the event of my early demise, they would have a history of their dad. So I started telling people about this idea, and people said, wow, that would make a spectacular solo performance piece. Everybody would relate to it. So then I decided to do it in small equity waiver houses. And I did it in little 60 and 90 seat theaters around North Hollywood, California. Eventually, the general manager of public television in Los Angeles came to see it and thought it was a fantastic idea to use as a fundraiser. So he bought the show, produced it on public television in LA, and it got such a good response that they aired it every Father's Day for 7 years after that. So it just kind of grew. And then my second one that Wheezy was the producer on was called The Reception, which was me narrating an imaginary wedding reception, which really dealt with the topic of divorce. And we had some great success with that, traveled all over Southern California with it. Then I did one about the news called Tonight at 11. Then I did one about getting old called Defying Gravity. And my current show is about getting even older and connecting the pandemic to it. And it's called Unassisted Living.
Fantastic. Great answer. Great information. Really fascinating
It's too
story.
long, wasn't it?
No.
Long for
It's great. We got plenty of time. So let's get to Louise Palanker. You found the Premiere Radio Networks, but before that, you did of note a documentary on the Cowsills, the old 60s band, the Cowsill family. How did you come upon that? What was your inspiration for that, and how did you pull it together?
Well, the history, the timeline is first I found Premiere Radio Networks with my lovely partners. And then I dabbled in stand-up and did other adventures. And when you could first Google something, I mean, I think most of us sat there and looked at the screen and thought, and Googled something that was important to us as a child, either some guy or some girl or some teacher or your favorite show or what have you. So my first Google probably was a lot of, when you say this to people in show business, what was the first thing you Googled? They invariably the answer is, oh, me. I Googled me. But I Googled the cow sales. And I found that the fans had put together a website, and I went in there and I signed the guest book. And this other fan wrote back and said, oh, it says you live in LA. You should really come to this pub and see Bob cow sale. And I thought, that's something that I wouldn't like to do because it just it felt sad because these guys were on my walls, and now one of them is playing in a bar, and why, and I don't want to know. So I put it off for 3 weeks because everything that you don't want to do, whether it's the dentist or going to a pub to see Bob Cowsill, it's 3 weeks later seems like a good idea at the time. The 3 weeks roll around, I come in there and I'm like terrified. And at Premiere Radio and writing for Rick Dees, I've interviewed thousands of celebrities, but here I am terrified about someone that was important to me when I was 11. And I think we all have that sort of vulnerability. We become a little kid, but I met him and it turned out to be, just serendipitously, those 3 weeks, it turned out to be the night that John Cowsill was marrying one of the Bangles. And all of the Cowsills were in town for that wedding. They moved their wedding party into the pub, and they stood there under that dartboard and sang those same musical magical harmonies that I
think
remember.
I Love You, right? Was that one? No, that was a Partridge
No,
Family.
That's a Partridge Family
Right.
song.
I love the Flower Girl, right?
Flower Girl, The Rain in the Park and Other Things,
Right.
Hair, Indian Lake, We Can
right.
Fly, a bunch of hits. And you're watching them and you're like, what happened? They're as good as I thought they were when I was 11. So I want to know what happened. And that journey kind of led me towards making the documentary.
Fantastic. Now, on your show, my guests are Fritz Coleman and Louise Palanker, Media Path Podcast. You have there is some nostalgia there. You have a lot of interesting stars of the older TV shows. How do you choose your guests, and where is your main area of the two of you together of interest? Like, oh, we want to get this person or that person. I saw recently you had one of my heroes, Felix Cavallari of the Young Rascals.
Right. He was unbelievable.
Yeah,
and such a gentleman.
Yeah.
He's just the best guy. I mean, we're both sort of obsessed with pop culture, history, politics, documentaries, but we love the stuff that we loved as kids. And so whenever we can get somebody that we enjoyed as kids, that's our first choice. And then we kind of put together wish lists and share that with our talent coordinator, and we sort of take it from there.
And who would be?
You grew up in New York, so
Right.
The Rascals was like blue-eyed soul, and you loved it for the same reason I did. I was from Philadelphia, and it was all about soul music, and it was honestly, it was a great honor to meet him, and he was so approachable and real and forthcoming and honest, and it was a great interview. We just had a blast with him.
A couple of years ago, I was in Ocean Grove, New Jersey, and they have a huge open air auditorium, and the Rascals featuring Felix Cavallari played, and he had that huge B3 organ that he's known for.
Yeah.
And the sound was incredible, and he was a real gentleman. And I felt bad in a way in that, his people were outside selling CDs and stuff like that, and he wasn't the headliner. Tommy James, remember Tommy James and the Shondells, was the headliner. But the songs and the talent of Felix Cavallari and the Rascals, I think they were very undervalued, underrated. What do you guys think?
I agree 1,000% with what you said. Some of the greatest R&B harmony, their ballads and their faster songs. I mean, I can remember specific moments in my life when those songs would get cranked up on my car radio. I was a huge fan of the Rascals. Wheezy's tired of hearing me say that, but it's true.
I think that the Rascals may be underrated when you in the entire like musical spectrum, but if you talk to musicians or people that really love music, the Rascals come up often. I
Oh yeah,
find.
Wheezy, you said we get some of the best reaction we've gotten in a long time from our Felix interview in the newsletter we put out about it.
Right. I put out a weekly newsletter and people can write back to me. And it was all my musician friends who wrote back and said, this
Yeah.
is awesome. I love Felix.
You guys are terrific. I am a newbie to Southern California. I've been here about 3 years, and I'm still putting together, like, I understand this, I'm learning about that. Most of the experience has been very good. I find driving is very different out here, and I hope you guys can educate me a little bit. I noticed that for the most part, people are polite. You go to the four-way stops, everybody knows what order to go in. God forbid you don't, everybody gets upset. All right, I understand that. I fall into line. But I also notice, like, people will cut you off. They pass you on the right. They will cut you off just to get to a red light. Everybody, you have to really stay. And when you're on the 5, you really have to stay on beam. You can't, if you want to go slow in the right lane, forget it. You have to really keep up. And it's very aggressive driving. I was surprised by that. Is that me, or have you noticed the same thing?
No, you're being very friendly in the way you're describing a nightmare, a hell on wheels, which is the 5 freeway. The 5 freeway is if your carotid artery had 90% blockage and you needed a stent in it, because it's awful. There's never a time when the 5 freeway is not a nightmare. So you'll get even more vitriolic and angry about it as you live here.
I think there's like a lot of variables, and some of them that you don't know is how late are they and how important is who they're about to meet. So if you're on your way to a meeting with Tom Cruise, you get to pass on the right. It just really depends. If you're late to see, the head of some studio, you get to. There should be a ranking on your car, like how important are you and your meeting, and then you get to cut people off.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think
That
a
was
lot
the
of
good thing about COVID. The traffic was so light, it was like post-apocalyptic. It didn't, I felt guilty being on the freeway with this little amount of traffic. It was crazy.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of the people who cut you off on the right, they just want to get to this is not the 5. This is just on regular roads. They just want to get to the red light ahead of you, and they're on their way to Costco or whatever. So it is a different experience, because if you're in New Jersey, you pass somebody on the right, that's very rare, and people get upset. And here, it's just common, like people are flying by you on either side. Anyhow, a lot of cultural changes here. Did you guys have any sticker shock or adaptations you had to make when you moved from Buffalo out to the West Coast? And has California changed in the time since you've been here?
I mean, for me, it was a difference between being a kid and living in Buffalo and being a grown-up and living in Los Angeles, and it's kind of like throwing your baby into the water and she'll start to swim. So for me, I don't think I noticed. I just thought it was being an adult. And what I liked about LA was that it starts at the ocean and then it goes to the right. So I never really had like a bird's eye view of Buffalo, because my mom or my dad were driving. But when you have to drive, you learn where things are. And so for me, it was just really about becoming a grown up and learning where things are in a city that wasn't the city I grew up in. And I'll let Fritz answer the question about whether or not LA has changed since we've been here.
Oh, I think it's gotten a lot more crowded. Houses are ridiculous. What you can't do in Southern California, if you're buying a house in California, is to discuss buying or selling a house in California with somebody who does not live in California, because they won't get it. They'll think you're just showing off, throwing these big figures around. They don't realize that it's status quo in the state of California. It's gotten more crowded, but to Wheezy's point, the beautiful thing is the rapidly changing topography out here. You can be skiing at Big Bear in the winter and 2 hours later be surfing in a warm afternoon at the beach. So it's a wonderful combination of topography out here. But I think it's just gotten crowded. I think, honestly, I don't know if Wheezy agrees with this or not. I think it's more, I think traffic is worse now than it was before the pandemic. It just seems like it was, or maybe I'm just more irritated by it. Do you agree with that?
I mean, I have a set places that I go every week. And then I spend half the week in Santa Barbara, which is about 80 miles northwest. So, I mean, I have dinner with my sisters. I do the podcast out of my house. And then on Friday, I drive to Santa Barbara. So I'm not having to do errands in LA. I do those kinds of errands in Santa Barbara where it's super easy to park and go and get something that you need. So, but when you're in LA, you do kind of like back time things. You're like, okay, I have to be a certain place. And like, I'm going to have to circle for parking, or I'm going to have to park about like 17 blocks away. So let me put that into my chart as I calculate the time I need to leave my home. Tomorrow, Fritz and I have to go to Santa Monica to be on NPR. So we've been back timing that for weeks now. Figuring out.
For instance, if I wanted to drive to your house in Carlsbad, Robert, that could take anywhere from an hour and a half to 4 hours on the 405 or the 5. You just never know. And on any given, there's no pattern to it. On any given day, it can be very easy or it can be a nightmare. So I would always give myself, I do lots of comedy shows in San Juan Capistrano and Mission Viejo and places down close to you. And I always give myself like 3 or 4 hours, even if it only takes an hour, then I go somewhere and sit in a Starbucks for 2 hours. But you never can count on being able to get somewhere in the amount of time you calculate, as you well know.
As hosts, you work together, obviously, during the podcast. Do you guys, you've known each other for a while, you're friends, obviously, a great chemistry and great rapport. Do you guys hang out at all together, or is it strictly at this point, is it, when you have to get together, you want to have that as your quality time? And, I have friends that I haven't talked to for 3 years. I pick up exactly next time I speak to them, we're in the same place. For you guys working together, do you socialize? Do you hang out? Is it strictly business? If I don't want to get too personal, but just out of curiosity for our listeners.
We socialize on the phone. Weezy has said, her main residence is in Santa Barbara. She comes down to Sherman Oaks in to do our podcast in her beautiful podcasting studio. And then I have grandchildren and children. And so our lives are very, very busy in different ways. So up till a few years ago, I used to go to her house every weekend with my children, and she would teach them how to play the drums and guitar, and we would watch movies. And it was like going to day camp at her house. But they're grown up now, and our lives are slightly different. So we're not as, we don't relate outside of the podcast as much as we used to, but we're still awesome friends.
You guys are terrific. The name of the show is the Media Path Podcast. Fritz Coleman, Louise Palanker. What's coming up next for you, and where can my audience find you?
Our next podcast, let's see. We have, I think one of the guys, Bruce Bellin from the Four Freshmen. And you can get us wherever you get your podcasts. We also do a video version of it that's on YouTube, and we have a YouTube channel called Media Path Podcast. So wherever you go to type in the name of a podcast, we will show up. And we're looking forward to having some interesting guests coming up. Let me take a look at the schedule and see what's going to be exciting.
We do our show on Tuesdays, and yesterday we introduced Scott Shepard, who right now is writing novels, but he wrote television shows and was a showrunner in some of television's most famous shows like Quantum Leap and Miami Vice. He's also the progeny of some of the most famous people in Hollywood. He's the great grandson of Louis B. Mayer of MGM. His father produced Breakfast at Tiffany's. His grandfather ran 20th Century Fox and Universal. So it was a fantastic conversation with Scott Shepard about his current novels and about his family. He was very amusing and self-deprecating. We had a great time with him.
Fantastic.
And we are 107 episodes in. So if you want to just kind of sift through here and see, what's exciting to you, we've had Cindy Williams from Laverne and Shirley. We've had Henry Winkler. We've had Peter Noon from Herman's Hermits. We've had Congressman Adam Schiff. We have Judy Tenuta, a lot of child stars from our childhood, Butch Patrick, kids from My Three Sons. We've just had, it just runs the gamut. One of the interesting shows that we did had Vicki Lawrence from the Carol Burnett Show, and the daughter of Don Knotts, who's written a book about her dad. And that was just an interesting combo into 60s and 70s television. So we've got all kinds of fun stuff like that. So if you grew up watching this stuff and loving it, we've got something for you.
Okay. Fritz Coleman, Louise Palanker, the Media Path podcast and YouTube. Check it out. Thanks for being on Guys Radio. You guys are wonderful.
Thank you so much, Robert. It was a lot of fun.
If you enjoy the content and guests I bring you each and every week on Guys Radio and TV, please support us by subscribing to our channels. Thank you.